All right, so let's jump into all this info you sent about sharing your podcast. Looks like free promotion strategies are the name of the game, right?
Exactly. Got to make the most of those resources, right?
Definitely smart thinking.
Yeah.
And you've already got a good handle on the foundation, a hosting platform as your home base before you branch out to all the other places your podcast can live.
Absolutely. It's fundamental. What's really interesting is how many options there are now beyond the big names like Apple Podcasts.
Yeah, I was surprised by some of
We're
these.
talking Spotify,
Hmm.
YouTube, even venturing into places like TikTok. Some unexpected avenues for sure.
Yeah, for sure. So maybe we can make this our mission today to help you figure out which of these free platforms are worth your time.
Sounds good to me.
Not just which ones, but how to actually make them work for you, not the other way around.
Love it. Now, before we get lost in this sea of platforms, we got to solidify that foundation you mentioned, podcast hosting. It's important to understand that a host isn't just where your audio files live.
Right, it's more than just storage. I've seen RSS feed pop up a lot in this research. What's the deal with that?
Okay, so think of it as a constantly updated menu for your podcast.
Okay.
Each new episode gets added to this menu, and podcast apps use it to know what to show your listeners.
So it's like a digital menu being shared behind the scenes.
Yeah,
Got it.
yeah.
Now, you mentioned Anchor and Podbean as popular free options, but they seem pretty different.
Exactly. It's not one size fits all, right? Anchor is incredibly user-friendly. They pretty much hold your hand through the whole process, even with recording and editing.
That sounds perfect for someone just starting out who might be a little intimidated by all the tech stuff.
Exactly. But the trade-off is less control. You're letting Anchor make a lot of the decisions, especially with how your podcast appears on other platforms. If you're more of a DIY person wanting to tweak and customize things, Podbean gives you more freedom.
More control, but maybe a steeper learning curve.
You got it. And keep in mind, the free Podbean plan has limited storage, 5 hours worth. So if you're planning on making super long episodes, it might not be the best fit.
Good point. There's also SoundCloud in here. I always thought of them as like a music platform. But they do host podcasts too, right?
Yeah, they do. And this is where understanding your goals comes in. If you're looking to reach an audience that's very active and social, SoundCloud's built-in community features could be a real advantage. People can comment directly on your episodes, so you get that back and forth you don't always get elsewhere.
Okay, so it's less about SoundCloud being like a powerhouse for podcast hosting
Mhm.
and more about using it to reach a specific audience.
Exactly. But no matter where your podcast lives, there are two giants you absolutely can't ignore: Spotify and Apple Podcasts.
Right, those are unavoidable. Even if you're using a free hosting service like Anchor or Podbean.
They're still the gatekeepers to massive audiences. And this is where getting a bit more technical can pay off, especially with Apple Podcasts. They're known for having a stricter review process for new podcasts.
So making a good first impression is key. What should we focus on?
Okay, your podcast description needs to be amazing, clear, concise, and captivating. And don't underestimate the power of your artwork. It's the visual representation of your podcast, so make it eye-catching and professional.
Think of it as your podcast's cover, right? You want it to stand out.
Exactly. And while submitting to Spotify is usually simple, a click through your hosting platform, Apple Podcasts has its own separate system, Apple Podcasts Connect. You'll need an Apple ID to get started there.
Okay, so we've got hosting figured out. We're ready for the big leagues of Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Where do we go from here? We've barely scratched the surface.
Don't worry, this is where it gets really interesting. We've got social media platforms that can work wonders for promoting your podcast, even if they're not specifically for audio.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Let's unpack that.
So let's talk about leveraging the power of social media. We spend so much time on these platforms anyway, might as well make them work for our podcast.
Yeah, I'm all for working smart, not harder. But social media and podcasts feel like very different worlds. How do we bridge that gap?
It's all about understanding the unique language of each platform. Like Facebook, for example. Creating a dedicated page for your podcast is a great starting point, but it's not enough to just post episode links.
Right, it can't just be a broadcasting platform. People go to Facebook to connect and engage.
Exactly. Think about sharing behind-the-scenes content. Snippets of your recording process, bleepers, even polls asking for listener input on future episode topics. And don't underestimate the power of Facebook Live.
Live video for a podcast. I'm not sure I'm ready for my close-up.
It doesn't have to be anything fancy, just you talking to your listeners, answering questions, giving them a sneak peek of what's coming up. It's all about building that personal connection.
Okay, I can see how that builds excitement and makes listeners feel like they're part of the journey. What about Instagram? It's so visual. It seems a bit trickier for an audio-based medium.
It's definitely a different beast, but there are ways to make it work. Have you ever seen those eye-catching audiograms, sound waves dancing across a visually appealing background?
Oh yeah, I've seen those. They definitely grab your attention.
Those are your secret weapon on Instagram. A great way to share snippets of your most compelling episode moments. And don't forget about using Instagram stories to give sneak peeks, run polls, and interact with your listeners in real time.
So it's about finding creative ways to visually represent the audio content.
Yeah.
Almost like creating a movie trailer for each episode.
Precisely. Think about the visual elements that best represent your podcast's brand and tone. Are you going for bold and colorful or more minimalist and elegant?
I like that. It's about translating your podcast's personality into a visual language. Okay, so we've tackled the big social media players. What about niche platforms? I've heard Stitcher mentioned a lot in my research.
Stitcher's a great option if you're looking to tap into a dedicated podcast listener base. It's like a carefully curated library for podcast enthusiasts.
So it's less about reaching the masses and more about finding your target audience.
Exactly. They have a sophisticated categorization system that makes it easy for listeners to discover shows that align with their interests. Plus, they offer cross-promotion opportunities with other podcasts, which can be a powerful way to expand your reach within your niche.
It's like a network of podcasts supporting each other, helping listeners discover new shows they'll love.
Now, if you're looking to tap into a massive audience that might not be actively seeking out podcasts, iHeartRadio is worth considering.
iHeartRadio, isn't that mostly known for music radio stations?
It is, but they've expanded heavily into the podcasting world. And this is where it gets interesting. You're reaching people who might not even be using traditional podcast apps.
It's like catching them off guard. Oh, I was just listening to my favorite radio station, and now I'm hooked on this podcast.
Exactly.
Mm.
You're tapping into a whole new pool of potential listeners. Now, remember when we talked about building a dedicated fan base? That's where platforms like Reddit and Discord come into play.
Those are communities with a capital C. I've heard stories about both the amazing support and, let's just say, the passionate feedback you can get on those platforms. How do we navigate that?
The key is to approach these communities as a participant, not just a promoter. Find subreddits that align with your podcast's niche. Engage in conversations, contribute value, and only share your podcast when it's genuinely relevant to the discussion.
It's about earning their trust and respect before asking for their attention.
Exactly. No one likes feeling like they're being sold to be authentic, be helpful, be a genuine part of the community. Now, Discord is a bit different. It's all about creating a dedicated space for your podcast community to thrive.
So it's like building your own virtual clubhouse where listeners can connect and geek out about your podcast.
That's a great way to put it. You can set up different channels for episode discussions, Q&A sessions, behind-the-scenes content, even listener meetups. It's about creating a sense of belonging and fostering those deeper connections.
I'm starting to see a pattern here. It's not just about sharing your podcast. It's about creating an experience, a community, a connection. It's about making your listeners feel like they're part of something special.
You're absolutely getting it. And that brings us to some unexpected platforms that can be surprisingly effective for podcast promotion. YouTube, Tumblr, LinkedIn, and even TikTok.
Wait, YouTube makes sense. Video is huge. But Tumblr and LinkedIn and TikTok, seriously, those feel so far removed from the podcasting world.
Let's start with YouTube. Don't underestimate its power as a search engine. People go there to learn and be entertained. Uploading full episodes with a static image or simple visuals can still attract viewers.
But what about those who prefer just the audio? Isn't that taking away from the essence of podcasting?
Here's where strategy comes in. Think about creating shorter video clips. Highlight reels of the most compelling moments, maybe with some engaging visuals and text overlays. You're essentially creating mini trailers for each episode.
And those can drive people back to the full audio experience on their preferred platform.
I like it. Now, Tumblr might seem like a blast from the past, but it can be a valuable tool for adding depth and context to your podcast. It's a great platform for sharing transcripts, show notes, behind-the-scenes content, even longer-form written pieces that expand on episode topics.
It's like creating a companion blog for your podcast, giving listeners another way to engage with the content.
Exactly. And if your podcast has a business or career focus, LinkedIn is where you want to be. Share episodes with insightful commentary. Participate in industry-specific discussions, and position yourself as a thought leader in your field.
LinkedIn for podcasting. Never would have thought of that. It's brilliant, though. You're reaching professionals who are already primed to learn and grow. Okay, so what about TikTok? I'm still having trouble wrapping my head around that one.
TikTok is all about capturing attention quickly and sparking curiosity. Think about creating short, engaging teasers that leave listeners wanting more.
Like those to-be-continued moments in a TV show that make you desperate to see what happens next.
Exactly. You can also use TikTok to showcase your personality, share behind-the-scenes shenanigans, or even jump on trends relevant to your podcast's niche.
Okay, I'm starting to see the potential. It's about using TikTok's playful, fast-paced format to draw listeners into your world.
Precisely. But remember, with all these platforms vying for our attention, it's crucial to prioritize. You don't have to be everywhere at once.
Right. Trying to juggle all these platforms could turn into a full-time job in itself. So how do we decide where to focus our energy?
Think back to your ideal listener. Where do they hang out online? What kind of content are they already consuming? Choose the platforms where you're most likely to find them. It's about working smarter, not harder.
Quality over quantity. That makes a lot of sense. But even with a focused approach, it's easy to feel overwhelmed. Any tips for avoiding platform overload?
Experiment. Dip your toes into different platforms, see what resonates with your audience, and don't be afraid to adjust your strategy along the way. It's a journey, not a destination.
This is great advice. But with all these platforms and strategies, how do we keep from spreading ourselves too thin and losing sight of the heart of our podcast?
That's a crucial point. It's easy to get caught up in the whirlwind of promotion and forget why we started podcasting in the first place. Remember, your content is king. These platforms are just tools to amplify your voice and connect with your audience. Don't let them distract you from creating the best podcast you can.
It's about striking a balance, right? Nurturing the podcast while also exploring ways to share it with the world.
Exactly. And here's a final thought to ponder. Think about each platform not just as a distribution channel, but as an opportunity to create a unique experience for your listeners.
Ooh, I like that. It's about going beyond just sharing a link and actually crafting an experience that's tailored to each platform and audience.
You got it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, shall we explore some specific examples of how to bring this idea to life?
Let's do it. Okay, so we're talking about creating unique experiences on each platform. How do we actually make that happen? It sounds kind of abstract.
Think of it this way. You wouldn't wear a tuxedo to a beach party, right?
Right.
Each platform has its own vibe, its own language. Your approach needs to match that.
So it's like code switching. You adjust your communication style depending on who you're talking to.
Exactly. On Instagram, it's all about eye-catching visuals and quick hits of audio. Those audiograms we talked about, paired with a strong visual aesthetic that reflects your podcast, that's the sweet spot.
And Facebook is more about fostering that sense of community, inviting conversation, asking questions, going live to chat with your listeners.
Right.
Makes sense.
Right.
What about YouTube? Beyond just uploading episodes, what are some ways to make it a more engaging experience?
YouTube is a visual medium, so think visually.
Yeah.
Could you create short animated explainer videos that delve deeper into certain episode topics? Or maybe record yourself reacting to listener comments or questions, a sort of video podcast commentary track.
Ooh, I like that. It adds another layer to the listening experience. People love seeing the faces behind the voices too.
Now with Tumblr, it's all about providing that extra layer of depth. Imagine posting full episode transcripts alongside visually appealing quotes or key takeaways. You're catering to different learning styles and giving people multiple ways to engage with your content.
It's almost like creating a multimedia study guide for each episode. Super helpful, especially for those who are more visual learners.
And let's not forget LinkedIn. If your podcast is business-focused, think about creating short, polished video clips that summarize key insights or actionable takeaways from your episodes. You're positioning yourself as a thought leader and offering valuable content in a format that LinkedIn users love.
It's like the professional version of those eye-catching Instagram audiograms.
Huh?
You're making your content accessible and shareable in a context where people are already in a learning mindset.
Exactly. And then there's TikTok. That one might seem the most daunting. But think about it as an opportunity to let your personality shine.
Embrace the chaos.
Yeah.
Right? I'm picturing behind-the-scenes bloopers, funny podcast-related skits, maybe even trying out those trending dances, as long as I don't break a hip.
You got it. The key is to have fun with it and show your audience that you're not just a voice in their headphones. You're a real person with a sense of humor. TikTok is all about authenticity and relatability.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation. It feels like we've gone from a basic understanding of podcast promotion to a masterclass in audience engagement.
And remember, this is just the tip of the iceberg. The beauty of podcasting is that it's constantly evolving. There will always be new platforms and strategies emerging. The key is to stay curious, experiment, and most importantly, have fun connecting with your listeners.
Absolutely. So to wrap this all up, what's the one piece of advice you would give to someone who's just starting out on their podcasting journey?
Focus on creating high-quality content that you're passionate about. If you're genuinely excited about what you're making, that enthusiasm will shine through and attract listeners. And don't be afraid to experiment with different promotion strategies. Find what works for you, and most importantly, enjoy the ride.
Fantastic advice. This deep dive has been incredibly valuable. Thanks for helping us navigate this exciting world of podcasting.
My pleasure. And
Yeah.
to everyone listening, happy podcasting. It takes